Okay, welcome back to another video. My name is Dan. If you're new here, I'm here talking about all things bass and music. So in my last video, I talked about all the things you could do with your hands to shape your tone, from like playing slap bass to fingerstyle picking and all sorts of little tricks you could do to get different sounds. One question I get a lot, especially like, when I'm teaching beginner students or people new to bass, sometimes even people who've been playing for a long time, is like, what do these knobs even do? Like, how do you shape your tone at your bass? And, it's a world that's pretty confusing because some basses, like this P bass, are very simple with just 2 knobs. Other basses, like my ESP here, has 5 knobs, and even then I ended up taking one out. And there's so many different configurations with like different switches, push-pulls. I mean, if you've been around the industry, you've probably seen basses like this before. But I thought today I'd talk about what are some of the common configurations you find, how to use them usefully in context. So I'm starting off today on my Fender P bass here. I'm doing that because this is the most common bass. It's probably the bass you think about when you think about what a bass looks and sounds like. And it's also got the simplest control layout with just 2 knobs. So the first knob is just a volume. And the volume does what it says it does. So if you're a guitar player, you're probably used to the volume not really being a volume knob. Like the way guitars interact with guitar amps, typically turning the volume knob has a small change in volume and a really big change in your tone because of how the amp breaks up and all that. Typically as bass players, we're playing through gear with a lot more headroom. So for us, a volume knob makes a very big difference in volume and a pretty not that noticeable difference in tone. So for all intents and purposes, this is just a volume knob. Now where the magic of an instrument like a P bass comes in is the tone knob. So when you think about the second tone knob, like you have a knob that just controls your entire tone. Like what does a tone knob do? Well, if you didn't know, and hey, no shame if you didn't, what the tone knob does is it rolls off some of your high frequencies. So if I'm just playing a string, as I roll it back, it cuts off some high frequencies and then brings them back. So when I first started playing bass, I was really afraid of the tone knob because when I thought of rolling off your highs, I thought, well, that's where all your clarity is. If you roll that off, you're going to lose your clarity, your bass is going to get muddy, you're not going to have any punch. But a very important thing we'll keep coming back to is the idea of subtractive EQ and negative space. For example, if I show you just like this happy face that I drew and then invert the colors, the second image you still identify as a happy face, but technically it's not a happy face, it's a bunch of black shading with a bunch of space missing in the middle that just happens to look like a happy face. I know this seems maybe a little esoteric, but stand with me here. If I was to ask you, would you rather have a low-end boost on your bass or a high-end cut? Most people just instinctively be like, yeah, boost the low end, give me more of those lows. But if you look at the EQ graphs, they're the same picture. Like there is subtle differences between the two, but more or less, when you start cutting high frequency, it has the same effect as boosting up some of your lows and even some of your mids, because this does not cut that low into your bass signal. So sometimes, depending on the mix, rolling your tone knob off is actually going to make your mids and your bass more pronounced, giving you more punch. Or, just sometimes it is very obvious that your bass is maybe too clingy or clangy, and you just need to get rid of those frequencies, in which case, yeah, a cut is going to do that. So to show the example of how wide of a range your tone knob can have on your sound, here's 2 playing examples. The first one, I'm going to do with the tone knob wide open. And when I think of wide open tone knob, I think of players like Duff McKagan, for example. And that's on this P bass with flat wound strings, by the way. You can still get a lot of bite out of a P bass with a pick, even with flat wounds. Now, if you look at a different player like Carol K, even still playing with a pick, tone knob rolled off just a little bit. It's going to tame some of that high end, and it's actually going to bring out the lows and the mids a little bit, still giving you some clarity. So all that is just from moving my tone knob just a little bit. Cool, so switching over to my Warwick now, the first obvious difference is that there's 2 pickups. So whenever you're dealing with a 2 pickup bass, there's 3 distinct sounds you gotta think about. The first one is gonna be your neck pickup. So if I just go straight over to the neck pickup, it's going to sound very similar to what you would get from a P bass. It's going to be a little bit thumpy. And then the other sound you can get is if you go all the way over to the bridge pickup. The bridge pickup is going to have a little bit less in the lows, and it's going to have a little bit of a mid-range bark or growl to it. I think of kind of like the Jaco Pastorius kind of tone when I think of the bridge pickup. Now, a lot of people assume when you're dealing with a 2 pickup bass is that, oh, well, if I play it in the middle, I'm going to get a sound that's kind of halfway between those 2 sounds. But no, you actually get a 3rd sound. And that's because of something called phasing. So if you think of like guitar players, let's say playing like a Strat, the iconic Strat tone being like that position 2, position 4. Whenever you have 2 pickups working together, they're going to be a little bit out of phase. And phasing is a phenomenon when you get 2 different signals that are almost the same, just a little bit off, and they start to fight with each other. And for those like Strat players who like those in between positions, there's a reason for that. When you play on 1 pickup, the sound is really, really precise and focused. And then when you play on 2 pickups, the sound gets a little phasey, and that phasing actually softens your attack a little bit, especially in the top end. So players who play that kind of funky like ticka-ticka-town kind of Strat sound, like that in-between position because it smooths out their playing a little bit and takes what would be a very harsh sound on a single pickup and makes it kind of a little bit more smoother and more palatable. And bass players, we really like doing this for the same reasons. For example, I'm not doing like that kind of Strat thing, but for bass players, we oftentimes like to do slap. And that phasing just kind of tames that top end a little bit compared to sounds a little harsh, same with. But in between, it kind of gives this nice little smoothing effect. As well as kind of naturally scoops the mids a little bit as well. It's also great for like really heavy fingerstyle playing, like that you kind of see in like metal. Like as compared to or so yeah, that's really useful there. So here's some playing examples to kind of highlight the benefits of each pickup. So starting with neck pickup. Going over to the middle pickup. If you go all the way over to the bridge pickup, so you can see each of those pickup choices really influences the character of those styles and really brings out the characteristics you want in those sounds. Now, all those examples were with this Warwick in its passive mode. So this bass has an active passive push-pull switch. Sometimes they come on a switch like this. But in active mode, you get access to an onboard EQ. And for most active basses, this is really what you get. And this is where when you see basses with tons of knobs, it usually has something to do with some sort of active EQ controlling the bass, middle, and treble. Most times it's boost and cut. I know a lot of the old Stingrays are boost only, This bass only has a bass control and a treble control. And for a while I was thinking like, oh man, I really wish I had a mid control because I always want to control the mids. Think back to what I said earlier with your tone knob, think of negative space. Having a bass and treble knob actually does give you mid control. So the way to do that, since this bass is boost and cut, if I want to scoop some of the mids out, let's say for that like slap tone, I can actually boost bass and treble together. And it kind of scoops out, gives the impression of scooped mids, because boosting bass and treble is the same as cutting mids. And same with if I want to boost my mids up, I can actually cut my bass and treble a bit, and actually brings out the mids a little bit more. So I'm going to play through those 3 examples again, and this time I'm going to use some tone shaping from the EQ to kind of correct some issues with each of the sounds. So that was Living on a Prayer with a bass cut. Now with a treble cut. So you can see there, adding a little bit of EQ from the preamp kind of helped me fix a few little issues with just my clean sound. And the other nice thing is with having a preamp on your bass, so with like tone knobs, pickup selectors, all those, is that unlike having them on a pedal where like you have to like reach down and turn them as you're playing, it's nice to be able to have them at your fingertips. So as you're playing, you can react to things. For example, like, oh, you know, my guitar player just switched from a Les Paul to a Strat. There's going to be a very different gap to fill in the mix compared to, you know, before. And obviously there's way more options than just the options I showed here, but this should give you just a general idea of like, okay, like, what options do I probably have on my bass, and how can I, in like a live or studio situation, make little tweaks as I'm playing that kind of help my bass sit well in the mix and kind of fill in those gaps that you need to fill in as a bass player. So I hope you liked my deep dive into how to set bass tones with your bass. If you haven't seen it already, watch this other video I have on how to shape your tone just strictly with your hands without touching any knobs. And I'll have a full list of the gear I use in the description and my signal chain and how I got all my sounds today. Spoiler alert, I didn't really change anything on the pedal board. Everything's just pretty much straight in. And yeah, if you have any other questions about bass playing or bass tone, feel free to leave them in the comments, and you know, I might make a future video on that later. Anyways, thank you. See you soon.